Market prices right now are not good.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you. Always a treat to visit with you about ag-related issues. And here we are in a short trading week. Yes, indeed. Monday was a national holiday. Also, Monday was the inauguration, so lots of stuff going on. And I want to talk about the wheat and the status with the wheat in the central U.S. today. With me, I have a very special guest. Harries is with me. He's the vice president of Kansas Wheat. I guess technically you're vice president of, research and operations for
That is
the
correct.
organization?
Yeah.
All right. I tried to go from memory here, so hopefully I didn't mess that up for you. There's a lot of concern, Aaron, about the condition of the wheat right now. I have been hearing some stories that in southern Kansas, the wheat had so much growth on it that there's concern about this very cold snap coming through right now. It's an Arctic blast. Everybody's talking about the cold weather. Gosh, I think in the Dakotas, the wind chill's like 50 below. And if I'm looking correctly here, over your left shoulder on the camera here, are we looking out the window? Is that actually snow behind you there?
Yes, those are piles of snow, bigger piles of snow than I've seen since I've lived in Manhattan. In fact, we had a blizzard here in central and northeast Kansas the weekend of January 5th, and widespread foot to as much as 16 or 18 inches of snow. So a really big historical blizzard in some cases, which gave us a nice snowpack for most of the central third of the state. If you draw a line from Hayes south through Great Bend, anything east of that line had quite a bit of snow on the ground. A lot of good moisture in it. The ground was not frozen beneath it, so that's kind of acting as slow drip irrigation as it melts or when it melts into the soil. But those cold temperatures we had overnight are a concern. We set a lot of record lows here in Kansas this morning. We hit 14 below here at the Manhattan airport, which is not a record, but Salina, Kansas was 12 below. We typically only get that cold if there is a snowpack. And there is. The concern is that we've had some melt, in the past week. And so there was some wheat that was exposed to some of those cold temperatures.
If you would, maybe you can run down what some of the warning signals are for anybody that produces wheat and anybody wondering what it takes to do damage to wheat at this time of year. Of course, most people consider the wheat to be in dormancy right now. Is it possible to damage the wheat right now, or how cold does it have to get, and how deep does the frost have to go to really hurt it?
Yeah, winter wheat is at its most resilient right now because it is in dormancy. You mentioned stories of some really tall wheat in southern and southwest Kansas. It's hard to determine what that is. Sometimes people can get fooled, those might be oats or something that's being used as what they call green manure that will be tilled in, or it might legitimately be wheat fields. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Any wheat that is in that stage where it was a foot tall is past what we call the jointing stage. And if it truly was and it got as cold as it did, that wheat is going to be dead. It's too far along to tolerate that kind of cold. Now, the vast majority of wheat, and I'm thinking 95% or more in the state, is in a growth stage where it's fine and dormant. But when you have exposed wheat, winter wheat, at the temperatures that we talked about, you're going to see some winter kill. A winter kill is always localized, even within a field. The tops of the terraces are the first things that melt. That wheat exposed to the cold and the wind is more susceptible. Where there were bare spots in the wheat fields and it got down to 14 or 10 below overnight, you're susceptible to some damage there. And it's hard to assess that for another couple of months until that wheat starts coming out of dormancy. And then if we have favorable growing conditions in April and May, March, you can overcome a lot of that. But this kind of cold certainly causes a little bit of concern.
Overall, have you had a chance to talk with producers in the state about how much acreage they either increased or decreased this year? Have you been able to get a good gauge of that?
Well, USDA has gauged it down from 7.7 million acres to 7.4. So relatively small decrease. I think that's about 3%. So held fairly steady on acres, and that really kind of corresponds with what our farmers have told us. Market prices right now are not good, and so that pulled back a little bit on the acres, I think. But we did have a good start to the crop. I think the crop last time is rated 47% good to excellent, so it's in a better state than it has been for the past couple of falls, and that's important to getting a good start. There is good soil moisture in a lot of part of the state. So, it ultimately, Marlin, always comes down to how many acres you harvest and what that yields. And so between last year and this year, the change in acres number really isn't that significant.
You're kind of on that dividing line where they graze out wheat and where they never do. And so I believe in the southern part of the state, you do see quite a bit of grazing, put cattle on there in the fall or winter and get some forage value out of it. I would imagine that as we get to, the spring thaw and that sort of thing, if the prices don't improve, I would imagine a lot of cattlemen would just say, well, heck with it, just graze it out. And you could lose a bunch of acres. Is that true?
Well, that's certainly a possibility, especially with the price of cattle, right? If you can get a lot of gain on your beef on grazing that wheat this spring and especially this past fall, I think a lot of farmers will certainly take opportunity of that if they have some livestock. You can do both. In the spring, you can still graze that wheat for a little bit depending on the weather until it gets to what I referred earlier, the jointing stage. That's when you have to pull the cattle off the field. So it just depends on the weather, how big that grazing window is in the spring. So a farmer might be able to take advantage of that. And that's the beauty of winter wheat, though. There's a lot of value to it beyond just the price of the grain when they sell it at the elevator. There's that grazing potential, moisture conservation that it provides. So it's a very durable utility crop.
A lot of folks are familiar with you, of course, from the annual wheat tours. And I guess we already kind of have to set our sights ahead to this year. What time of year do you normally have that?
So we usually have that the third week in May. I don't have the calendar in front of me. We've moved it a couple weeks later in the past couple of years. It used to be the first week in May, but we found that moving it later in the year, it's a better educational opportunity because most of the wheat is headed at that point here in Kansas. Allows for the tour participants to see more. So yeah, that'll come up quickly, and a lot of eyes are always on that, depending upon what has happened during the winter months and the market situation, may be completely different when it comes to May. But yeah, we'll start promoting that tour not too far from now. The Wheat Quality Council, which hosts that tour, has its annual meeting in February in Kansas City. So there'll be a lot of talk about that, but it's always exciting to do that tour and kind of see where things stand.
Aaron, it's great to talk with you again. Thank you for all the information and stay warm out there. Aaron Harries with us from Kansas Wheat, and that'll do it for this episode. Thank you again for joining us. Appreciate that very much. For producer Breanne Jenkins, I'm Marlin Bohling. We'll catch you next time right here on the Comstock Channel. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and or options is substantial, and each investor and or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.